So you've either gotten your G5 or it's coming to you extremely soon. Probably like us and you're getting something new, you want to know how to use it. We've said this a lot about many devices that we currently use, but I think it's really important for a handheld stabilizer like the DEFY Gimbal, especially the G5, is learning how to balance this thing. I would say it's probably 90% of the success of how this thing works is based on balance. It's got to be balanced, and that's really what's going to make it work.
Definitely, yeah. We've seen it just tweaking the balance here and there, you can really get a much better image.
Yeah, and I would say that a lot of guys that we do a lot of training with and get it set up, they get it pretty close and it performs really well. But if you really want your gimbal to perform exactly as you think it should, balancing is going to be the key. And so today what we're going to do is just walk you through balancing from start to finish. We've got the 5D Mark II with our Mark III with 24 to 105. Obviously, this is a pretty small package. Some guys are using C100, C300, FS700. So we're kind of trying to show something that's very basic, but also very common with a lot of people, which is the 5D with a basic 24 to 105. So let's start off by learning a little bit about the different axis that's on the gimbal itself.
There's three different axes. There's the tilt axis, which is this guy here. It's basically the placement of your motor. You can just think about a motor in here. This is your tilt axis. You have your roll axis, which is on the back, which allows it to roll this way. And then you have your pan axis at the top, and your pan axis allows you to turn left and right.
Yep. And so knowing those, when we start to get into the details of it, obviously you'll learn, not that they're technical terms, but you'll learn how to quickly adjust your camera. So let's take the camera off, and what we'll do is we'll start from scratch and mess it up, or at least unbalance it very heavily. So when you get your Pelican case in for your G5, we obviously ask you questions like what camera are you using, what lens are you using, and the reason that's important is because if you're using a 5D with a 24-7, you're using a C300 with a 24 prime, what we do is we put that rig together and we physically test that in our office. We do a first round of testing, which is the technical test. We do a second round, which is where a filmmaker actually walks around with it and actually calculates how much it's moving and how well it looks and how does it translate into the camera. And then the final test is where we obviously do a video with the rig and present that to you as well. So those are things that we really want to test each rig. So when you get it, it's put into the Pelican case fully assembled. The only thing you really have to put together is this top plate. It's got 4 thumb screws and then you put the handles on and the rest of it's put together. But one thing you will have to do when you pull it out of the Pelican case is balance it. It's going to be slid over so it fits nice and tight into the case, which is great for transport or traveling with it, but when you get it out and set it up, this is what's going to happen.
Center of gravity is referred to throughout the whole video as CG. So anytime I refer to CG, I'm talking about the center of gravity of this rig. You're trying to get your center of gravity, basically anything under the handles here, where this motor starts, you want to try and center so that your camera just floats. So in order to do that, on each axis, on the tilt axis and the pan axis, you have 2 different adjustment points. You have your vertical CG and your horizontal CG. And then on your roll axis, you will have a vertical CG and a horizontal CG as well, but you'll have 2 different ways to adjust it. The first step is to actually just put your camera on. We have these plates that we send with the units, and they'll have screws with them, and you can just screw that right onto the base of your camera and then slide it onto the camera tray. And
this is going to be similar to pretty much any tripod quick release that you've had. We've manufactured it with a lever to have a locking mechanism on the side, making it pretty simple to get your camera on and slide right into place.
So the first thing is, once you get your camera set onto your tray, you just want to push your lever back to lock your camera into that tray so that it doesn't move forward or backward at all. The next thing you want to do is, you can tell that it's obviously just leaning to one side. So you want to adjust that. And the ways that you do that is on your roll axis, you have a point of adjustment where these 4 screws are, and a point of adjustment underneath the camera where you can adjust left and right.
And we typically tell people that when they're balancing, you try to get your camera to where the center of that lens is try to get it as center to the center of the gimbal as possible, and that allows that CG to be kind of straight. So you kind of got this fine-tuned adjustment on the bottom, and then you've got the bigger adjustment there on the back that you could slide left or right.
So the first thing I'm going to do is, on my roll axis, I'm going to adjust the horizontal CG, and in order to do that, on this back piece, I'm just going to unscrew these 4 screws lift up on the camera and then slide over and then let it sit back down. And you can tell that it still sits pretty heavy, so I'm going to do it a little bit more. And you can tell that it sits a lot straighter now.
We'll come back and actually adjust those in a bit, because that adjustment is really important for your roll, but we'll talk about that and why that design is really important. So
the next piece is the vertical adjustment for your tilt axis here. So basically you want to get this camera up, because right now it's sitting very bottom heavy. You can tell that because whenever you pull the camera up like this and you let go, it just swings both directions. It just
that's
swings.
actually terrible balancing. So if you're that bad off, it'll need a little lift.
So what we'll do is we'll loosen these two on the sides here, and then we'll push up on the camera tray and then tighten those down a little bit. And this will just give us a rough idea of where they are again. Now we can tilt it up this way, and you know that if it's swinging heavy that way, that it needs to be moved forward, and if it's swinging heavy the other way, it needs to be moved down. So I'll loosen these again, and I'll just come in.
A lot of times if you're first to balance, we've found it very easy to point the camera straight down, and so when he lets go of it, it actually hangs there. So if you can get this adjustment first, I think it'll be a lot easier to get the others, because it's got to hang straight down without you touching it, and it just stay there. And that's that CG for that he's trying to set here.
So that's the vertical CG there. Now you'll notice whenever you go back that the horizontal CG of your tilt axis is now off again. So you'll have to tweak that again just to make sure that it sits on there just right. And you'll know that it does whenever it doesn't swing one way or another.
It goes without saying, the balance is really just to keep it level on there. So when he finds that perfect spot, you can lock that down on the quick release plate.
So once I have that, I should be able to put the camera in pretty much any direction on this tilt axis here, and it's going to stay. Now you'll notice that my roll is off again, and in order to adjust that again, I can adjust it here in the front underneath the camera.
So underneath this base plate is a thumb screw, and that thumb screw actually slides on a rail back and forth, and that's really for those fine-tune adjustments that you can just slide it just barely left or right. So the back one's for your bigger adjustments, and the one underneath the camera is for your fine-tune adjustments, because it's really easy to slide that versus the back.
So that's the tilt axis. It is nicely balanced at this point. We'll move on to the roll axis, and the way that you check that is by lifting, just kind of pushing down on it. You can see that it drops. Well, it should stay exactly where you put it.
And most of the time when you open up your Pelican case and get it out, it's probably not going to be set, I would say, most of the time. And so this adjustment's really important, because if your roll's set, this is what allows you to get the most movement out of your camera.
So the way that we adjust the roll axis is just by simply loosening the bottom or the top and then tightening the top. Just 1 or 2 turns at a time is how we usually do it, just to kind of fine-tune that roll. And
it doesn't take much at all. The design for this piece, actually, you think 4 thumb screws and you're thinking, my goodness, do I ever have to fine-tune it that much? It's actually a pretty simple design, because that plate, think of it like when you tighten a thumb screw, it pushes on that back rod, which allows it to come out, or you push the bottom, which allows it to come forward. And that allows that camera to either pitch down or pitch up, which is what you're getting that balance here. So as you just tighten, you only have to tighten one at a time, so you might loosen the bottom and tighten the top, or vice versa. And that's what we're doing here. It's actually fairly simple, and that's how you get your CG.
So once you have a pretty close roll trim in, you can just give those a little bit of a snug fit, those screws. Don't over tighten them, but just a little bit of a snug fit. And then you might notice that whenever you go up, it stays on one side, but not on the other side. That just means you need to, again, come back and just trim out